when Maria informed me that one of the themes of this conference is the relationship between ethics and the built environment, I was quite excited, precisely because this is the question that I am now beginning to explore, certainly in a very preliminary stage. I have been somewhat dissatisfied by the rather limited way Islam has been largely depicted as textual or discursive tradition, which, while analytically useful, has relegated the question of spatiality to the background compared to, say, the question of temporality, which has, which has garnered a lot of attention. Consider, for example, Talal Asad's famous programmatic essay on the anthropology of Islam, where Asad identifies the proper site of investigation for anthropologists studying Islam to be instituted practice, quote, into which Muslims are inducted as Muslims. Now, the authenticating practices to which Asad refers are necessarily material, while Asad and those who are influenced by him have provided a wealth of examples of the diverse ways that bodily practices are central to the cultivation of ethical subjectivities. There has been relatively little discussion of the interlinked materialities of the bodies and the built environment. And yet, the notion of the city, for example, as the necessary site for learning and moral cultivation is one that was emphasized by early Muslims and the generations that came after them. Hence the importance and significance of spatial concepts, some of which came from pre-Islamic precedents like Haram, Misr or Amsar, Medina, and so on, together with the common disparagement of the hinterlands or the desert, the Badia, as dangerous and nefarious. In fact, reading the works of the historians of early Islam, as well as those who focus on the Islamization of different parts of the world, taught me how crucial the question of space, spatial practice, and of the built environment to the dynamics of Islamic becoming, to the extent that perhaps we can think of Islam as not only spatially embedded, but also as spatially creative. But I am, unlike Professor Dakak, I am not a historian of early Islam or of Islamization for that matter. So I want to approach this question by looking at cases I am most familiar with, namely the Hadrami Sayyids or Sada, or the Habaib as they are usually called, the so-called Ba'alawis, who for long have migrated to Java and different parts of the Indian Ocean world. Now, the Ba'alawis are not only known as successful cultivators of Islamic communities in places they reside, which I have documented in my book, but also as builders of communal spaces, from mosques and boarding schools to mausoleums and zawiyas. And it is the last of these types of space that I am particularly interested in. These zawiyas can be found in major cities of Java with substantial Hadrami diasporic population, from Bogor and Jakarta in the west to Pekalongan and Solo in central Java, all the way to Surabaya and Bondowoso to the east. Now, to be clear, these spaces are not the conventional Sufi zawiyas or tekkes that one can find in North Africa or in this part of the world. They are not really tariqah centers, strictly speaking, headed by a murshid, although the founders of those sites and many who frequent them are affiliated with the Ba'alawi tariqas. Instead, these zawiyas serve as sites for men and boys to sit and socialize, for news to be exchanged, for texts to be recited, and poems sung, for tea and coffee to be sipped, and for the past to be recounted and its accumulated wisdom passed on to the youngsters. These zawiyas are more akin to a site of leisure, right? Clubhouse, a public clubhouse, or sites of leisure. As a Hadrami man in his early 60s once told me when I met him in the Zawiya of Solo in central Java, quote, "This Zawiya is a place where we rest and stay still, a place where we pause the clock after a hectic morning or afternoon." Now, this gentleman's remark reminded me of what the philosopher Gaston Bachelard once wrote in his phenomenological musing on the corner, or the nook, which of course is what the term zawiya comes from. The corner, Bachelard wrote, is a heaven that ensures us one of the things we prize most highly: immobility. Consciousness of being at peace in one's corner produces a sense of immobility, and this in turn radiates immobility. But if Bachelard's corner is a space of solitude and daydreaming that opens up immense imaginative possibility, these zawiyas are sites of sociality. The inbuilt corner that constitutes the center and the pivot of these zawiyas is like a dead end, a terminus where many paths and daily itineraries converge with no roads ahead. And there, at that very space of immobility, a moral community came to be formed regularly through the maintenance of companionship, most often over the course of a lifetime. Now, the ethical possibility opens up by immobility, which in this case is afforded by the built environment, deserves further thinking. For the Ba'alawis, who are known for their trans-regional mobility, the question of living a mobile life, whether to migrate and pursue the world abroad or to stay put in the Hadramaut, was a burning question ever since they began to migrate en masse from the mid-19th century. For many Ba'alawi scholars in the Hadramaut, to migrate to Southeast Asia is to surrender one's moral rectitude to the vagaries of the world. It is to risk one's soul and religiosity to moral ruin. The way Java was depicted in many of these anti-migration writings is as a place of high mobility. Life in Java is hard. People are constantly moving. No one has the time to rest. Everyone is like a nomad running from one place to another in pursuit of wealth, as if they are chased by some wild beasts. These scholars reproduce the old trope of Islam as a settled way of life that is contrasted to the morally questionable nomadic lifestyles of the Badu. Ethical formation, it seems, requires some kind of immobility. And by the way, one may perhaps recall the concept and institution of the ribat, which seems to be built on this very assumption as well. The term ribat, of course, performs the function of a masdar of the form 3 of the verb rabata, which means staying put or attachment to a place or a person. Now, while the majority of migrants from the Hadramaut could be considered as economic migrants, some were scholars, and it was these learned actors who founded the zawiyas. Some of these zawiyas are modest annex to the residence of these scholars. Others are connected to mosques or prayer halls that they built. Some others are equipped with their own library. What made these sites as zawiyas are, one, the openness and publicness of the spaces, which means that people come and go. They sit and socialize at these sites even when the owner of these spaces are not around. Secondly, the clear separation, against demarcated by built environment, between the zawiya and the mosque, the residence or the private quarters, which means that when people sit in the zawiya, they do not feel as if they are impinging on people's privacy or that they need to observe certain manners that befit a mosque as a place of worship. And three, the kind of practice and activities that take place therein. Among the activities held in the zawiyas is the daily or weekly rawha. The term rawha comes from the word raha, meaning to go or do a thing in the evening or the afternoon. From the same roots, we also get the term rawhun, meaning soothing, mercy, happiness, comfort, beauty, and so on. And of course, the Indonesian and Malay term istirahat, to rest, is also from the same term. Ultimately, the term signifies something connected to the soul, the ruh. For the Ba'alawis, rawha is an activity of resting, of nourishing one's soul by listening to the inspiring words and deeds of the ancestors, singing the poems they composed while simultaneously catching up with friends. During the rawha, men sit for about 2 hours, usually between the afternoon and twilight prayers. They relax after a day of work, sipping few cups of tea eating snacks while connecting themselves to each other and to their pious ancestors. Elders usually sit with their backs leaned against the two walls that make up the corner of the Zawiya. Youngsters sit facing the elders, forming several rows. Some of these youngsters take turn to serve tea and snacks to the people gathered as an act of khidmah or service, just as the elders once did to the generations that came before. Texts recited during the Rawha are usually lighter compared to those studied at the mosques during formal classes. They are usually of the Majma'ul Kalam genre, that is, collection of discourses of famous Ba'alawi saints or scholars, which contain many stories, morally inspiring, but also entertaining and at times humorous anecdotes. Other texts recited during the Rawha is the Murasalat or the Mukatabat, correspondence between Ba'alawi scholars, or travelogues, Rihla. Their recitation exemplifies the beauty of friendship and the importance of maintaining connection through elegantly composed language, the virtue of neighborliness. And recitation of this text teaches people how to be a good human being, not through some morally commanding discourse that you often hear in the mosque, through, delivered by the khatib, but through examples and stories of lives worth emulating and lives worth living. Their recitation is usually interjected with poetry recitation, informal conversation between participating elders, and laughters as elders recount their own lives experience connected to what is being discussed in this text. Now, while hierarchy based on age and learning structures the seating arrangements at the Zawiya, there are times when such arrangement momentarily dissipates, such as during musical concert and dancing session. The built environment of the Zawiya, being a large open space with no chair and with floors already covered in rugs, made it an ideal place to stage a concert and dance. Two kinds of musical performances are usually held at the Zawiyas. One is the Hajir Marawis, which involves two kinds of drums, the bigger Hajir, accompanied by 6 to 10 smaller mirwas, along with a flute. The other is the more elaborate Gambus, featuring an oud guitar, a violin, keyboard, and tabla. During both concerts, people dance in turn. The atmosphere of the Zawiya becomes fun, noisy with clapping and singing in merriment. The normal sitting arrangement is no longer observed, as elders and youngsters dance in pair and sit side by side, becoming playful with one another. Such ludic events are crucial in establishing bonds of friendship between people of different generations, whose interactions are usually characterized by formality and deference. Such transgenerational bonds of friendship in turn facilitates ethical learning and transmission of moral teachings. I think the best term that characterizes this transgenerational relationship is the avunculate, right? The elders becoming uncles or to the youngsters, which allow more amicable ethical learning compared to the sternness of father and son relation or the teacher and pupil relation. Of course, anthropologists have studied avunculate relation and joking relation in different contexts, but I think for Muslim context, I have not found a very, it has not really been discussed extensively. So to conclude, one can say that the Zawiyas help to ensure the crystallization and maintenance of Hadrami moral communities and neighborliness in Java, a region despised by their ancestors as a place of waywardness. If Siegfried Kracauer once identified the hotel lobby as the emblematic site of modernity, characterized by constant coming and going of strangers who momentarily share a space of transit without gelling into a genuine sociality, the Zawiyas can be characterized as a site of immobility, termini dedicated for relaxing, socializing, and memorializing the ancestors, thereby engendering a transgenerational community of reading and listening, as well as dancing and joking. These Zawiyas emerge as social spaces for respectable leisure and moral learning, an alternative to the morally questionable coffee houses, a complement to the more serious mosques, and the momentary escapes from different sites of responsibility, whether one's workplace or one's home. While they began as diasporic spaces, they have become more inclusive, although they remain a homosocial space until today. These zawiyas are always open for communal activities, even when their owners are away. As a result, people who frequent the zawiyas never really feel like they are guests in another person's private space. All of this made the zawiyas much beloved to the people who frequent them, to the extent that one friend in Pekalongan told me quite proudly, quote, "I am a child of the zawiya. I was brought up by the zawiya." This and many other similar remarks I have heard suggest that the built environment is not simply an object used by tradition to realize its telos, but as something also possessed of agency and effective force. The very corner that is the pivot of the zawiya structures face-to-face interaction, avoiding relations that do not only connect those who are bodily co-present, but also the recounted ancestors, the temporally distant pious predecessors, into a shared moral imaginary. For my interlocutors, the zawiyas does not only signify a place or location. More than that, it points to a living and enduring assemblage woven from the dynamic interaction between built environment, shared practice, and moral tradition. I'll stop there.